fresh off of Kickstarter fulfillment. It's a new Worthington game. This one is Louisbourg 1758, with a very evocative image here on the front cover. This, of course, is a game covering the 2-month siege of Louisbourg in Canada, on Cape Breton Island, in 1758 during the French and Indian War / 7 Years' War. And I was taken by this because a lot of French and Indian War games that we have gotten, or that we get, are pretty operational or strategic in nature. And if you've played any of them, you know that the Siege of Louisbourg, it was sort of the pivotal moment in the conflict in North America between the French and the British, whereby French defeat was all but assured and British victory was basically locked in, as the British took the fort away from the French in a 2-month siege that involved naval units, the army units, some American Rangers and Native Americans. And so it immediately got me interested because the Siege of Louisbourg is so important to the French and Indian War. And the French and Indian War is probably one of my top 2 favorite eras of history. And so I try and pick up every game on the French and Indian War, no matter how obscure, because I like to see how designers portray the conflict. And like I said, for the most part, we're getting strategic and operational treatments of the French and Indian War, especially in the last 10 or 15 years. So seeing a game on the Siege of Louisbourg was really interesting to me because there's very few games that I know of, if at all, if any, that cover this specific battle. And it was pivotal, and there was a lot of interesting stuff happening around the British assault. It was actually the second time they tried to take the fort, and they succeeded in 1758. Worthington does some great production. Their games are typically on the much simpler side, but they're always really well produced. They've been putting out some interesting stuff lately on the American Civil War front, but every couple of years, it seems like they're putting out a game about the French and Indian War. And I own all of them. And I don't know what it is about the company that just really likes this period, but I think it's really cool that there is a company out there who has so many French and Indian War titles under its belt. They did a game called French and Indian War. It's a block game with simultaneous hidden movement that I think is kind of interesting. Pretty simplistic. It doesn't capture maybe the nuance of the French and Indian War, but it's a starter block war game. It's actually quite good. They did a game called Wilderness Empires. That was also a block game that I like quite a bit, that uses cards. And this Louisbourg 1758 actually follows in the Wilderness Empire mold in that it is a pseudo card-driven block game, but it's also a siege. So I figured I would do a quick unboxing. Spoilers, I did actually already open the box. Worthington likes to seal all of the components individually, so it just makes a ton of plastic waste, and it was just going to be a pain in the ass to show you on camera once I got in there. So I did open it up. I flipped through the rule book. I can give you some idea of how this plays, but in general, I think this looks like a really nice looking game from Worthington, something that you can play maybe at the end of a game night, or if you don't have a lot of time, but still captures the flavor of the Siege of Louisbourg in 1758. So let's open the box and take a look. So as is Worthington standard, you get 2 copies of the rule book, one for each player, which is quite nice. And the rules here are pretty simple. I did flip through them. I have a pretty good idea of how to play. We are talking about a block war game, so you're going to have blocks, French and blue, British and red. The turn structure is pretty simple. There's going to be an operational phase where you're either going to draw a card or check the weather. And I'll show you the cards and the way they work. The cards add a lot of flavor in historical events with a really low rules overhead. So you're allowed to play 1 card every turn, and then every other turn, basically on the odd turns, you're going to get to draw cards from the deck. Then there's a bombardment phase where units adjacent to the fort will be able to bombard each other. And then it is your player action phase. And what I find interesting here is there's 4 possible player actions: move your armies, raid, amphibious move, or ship move. However, every turn you can only take 1 of these 4 actions. So the action economy is going to be really tight. This was a hallmark of the French and Indian War block game that I talked about earlier by Worthington. It's a really tight action economy here, and so it's a 16-turn game. So you're going to get 16 actions over the course of the game, assuming it doesn't end earlier. And it's all really simple. You can move units. It's a point-to-point map. We'll look at that in a moment. There is a solitaire play. They do say that you can play solitaire and just turn all the blocks to face you and play both sides. So there's not dedicated solitaire rules, but what I do think is interesting here is that after you set the game up, you roll a d6, and there's a bit of a randomized setup for the French units. So when you play, if you decide to play solo, you can get a little bit of a different start position when you play. Here's the victory. If you can get the British to occupy Louisbourg, the British player will win, or if you can get those ships into the harbor, or the British have just a ton of strength points. And then if we get to the end of the game, the British haven't won, the French player are going to win. And it looks like, as well, the British can't lose too much manpower. So if the British strength points fall below 24 at the end of any turn, then the French will win as well. So trying to cause casualties. We'll look at the block makeup in a second. There's a brief history, or some strategic notes, and then there's a brief history of the siege of Louisbourg. What I find interesting here, the source for the history in the book is Wikipedia. Not the most professional sources. I would have liked to have seen maybe some other sources used for the game, but nothing in here looks too historically off, except maybe one thing I have a question on, because I've seen, in my reading, I've seen some notes about the landing, the British landings, about which unit specifically did that. Anyways, all told, it is, of actual rules, we are looking at 8 pages, so typical for Worthington. Usually they don't go more than that. It's going to be really easy to teach and play. Let's take a look at the map, if I can get it out of the box. It's a tight fit. I got it. It is a point-to-point map, done in this kind of muted brown style. Not the most colorful map I've ever seen. So looks like a 17 by 22 map, and here is Louisbourg. It's got kind of like a period feel, which is kind of neat. And you can see on the bottom here, we've got the turn track, 16 turns, and it reminds you when to draw cards and when to do a weather roll. The siege itself lasted 2 months. So, we're looking at what, 4 days? Yeah, about 4 days per turn. Here's the bombardment table. So when you do a bombardment, you'll look at this this table here. It would have been nice if they had the modifiers on here. I'm not sure why they didn't have those. And then here are your landing sites. So I guess the British will choose where they're going to try and land when they try and land. So here we have the fortress of Louisbourg itself, and then we've got Louisbourg Harbor. So you're going to have naval units here in Gabarus Bay. It's probably the English and the French here in Louisbourg Harbor. And as you can see, there's some different locations on the map that you'll be able to move your blocks to. Here's Lighthouse Point, the Island Battery, Louisbourg, Blackrock. And then you can see the different connections. So here we've got sort of like a wilderness or rough connection. Here we've got a normal connection. That's going to determine the number of units that can move across that connection when you take that point. And it looks like the British can land at Kensington Cove or Flat Point here or White Point here. So the British are going to come from this direction. We're going to have some naval engagements. If the British land here, they do have the option of maybe circling around in a different area. There's different types of units per side. We'll see that in a moment. But this is the map. Obviously, the colors of the units, the red and blue, will pop on this sort of like muted tone. And I'm excited to see how this plays out. Because again, like I said, there's not a lot of games about this particular battle. In classic Worthington style, we have a tray to hold all of the components with a lid on it. So the game comes with 8 D6s. And then here are the units which I've taken the opportunity to sort. So you've got British regulars here and French regulars on the other side. We've got some Native American allies for the French. We've got some French-Canadian provincial militia. And we've got the French Navy, who is vastly outnumbered during this siege, as you can see by the number of British naval units. Plus also we've got British landing ships. And then a couple of British light infantry units, and of course Rogers Rangers, who are American provincial ranger units, light infantry. All of these kind of together gives you a sense of what kind of challenge the French were facing as the British launched this massive assault. The one thing I have to say is that these blocks are not stickered; they're screen printed. So these graphics are actually printed on the block, and over time, that would be likely to wear out, especially if you're touching it with your fingers, you have oily fingers, or, the blocks are jostling around in here. So I've sorted it so that the blocks are all face up. There's not going to flip on top of each other. But what can happen, let's see if I can find one. What can happen over time is that you can get some of the markings, as you can see here, which potentially wearing off. So you just want to be mindful of that if you want to keep the game nice. I would have gone with stickers, but perhaps cost was prohibitive. Finally, we have the cards. So the game comes with a deck of cards. The deck is shared between both players, and cards will either come in a British or a French effect. And when you play a card, you can only play your faction's side, and you'll be drawing every other turn. You'll also have the opportunity to discard cards. So if you draw opponent's cards, you'll be able to discard them so that your hand isn't full. But you can see things. We've got like attrition. This is actually a bad card. So each side has attrition cards in their deck, and when you draw it, you must take attrition. So that's kind of some stuff can happen there. Here we have General James Wolfe, who was part of this attack, and who would a year later go on and take Quebec City and die in the process. Mortars. If you've played any of other Worthington's card-driven stuff, this will be kind of familiar in terms of the types of events and effects. Zeroing in helps British bombardment. There's a couple copies of each one. Island battery bombardment. So it's like if you occupy Lighthouse Point, which is where is that? Lighthouse Point is here. So presumably the British set up artillery. That will help your bombardments. I've got some ambush. That's funny because this image is used in another French and Indian war game, and I can't remember which one it is, but I've seen that picture before. Rest and resupply. So you get the idea. Force march. Let's take a look at some of the French ones. Again, attrition for the French. They've got 2 in there. Not good. Some force marching. This looks, the art on this card looks to be, that's a British officer and those are French officers. This looks like to me the scene from Last of the Mohicans at Fort William Henry, where the British agree to give up the fort to Montcalm. That's kind of what that looks like to me. Lighthouse Point bombardment, French sortie. The artwork's pretty good. Here is the French may move extra space, internal lines. Hit and run, Native Americans. The art's, it looks like it's all period art potentially. Again, ambush, surprising the fleet. This one, yeah, so the French get some extra firepower if we do sort of a naval engagement. One of the things is, historically, the French played it pretty conservative in terms of defending the fort. If they had maybe sallied forth and attacked the British, they might have not given up the initiative in terms of the siege. Madame Drucourt, this would be the governor's wife, who apparently was up on the ramparts firing cannons every day. Unsure of why there's a pineapple on this. Oh, I see. Because General Amherst of the British was impressed by her bravery and sent her pineapples as a present during the truce. That's kind of cool. I did not know that the governor of French Canada was firing artillery. And then a French sortie, which allows you to attack with the French. So, pretty simple game. But again, the history here is one that games don't typically cover a lot, and I'm excited to play this. You can probably play this in maybe an hour, it seems like. Maybe a little more, 16 turns. But the turns should go pretty quick. Play a card, roll some bombardment, take an action, pass to your opponent. So this is the recently released Louisbourg 1758 from Worthington Games, and I'm excited to add another French and Indian War title to the collection.